Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I had to look at my watch to work out whether it was morning, afternoon, evening, or Wednesday or Thursday or Friday. So good morning and welcome to the second session of day 2 of Automotive Logistics India. And this time, this session is going to be focusing particularly on the finished vehicle logistics side, or as I like to call it, the easy part of logistics. All you move is these big cars from one place to another. It can't be that complicated, can't be that difficult. So this should be an easy, no problem, full of solutions session. Before we start, just one thing to remind you of what's happening the rest of the day. Obviously, after this session, we're going to have a fantastic lunch. Hopefully a dry lunch this time, as opposed to our refreshing dinner last night, where there was a few drops of rain, which was a particular problem for me because the hairdryer in my room wasn't working very well. So I ended up going to sleep with my hair wet and everywhere. It was terrible. But and then after that, we're going to have the think tanks, the round tables. We call them now think tanks. Because of how they've progressed. India was always quite a good one for the think tanks. I remember going back to our very first conference when we had a couple of round tables talking about this little subject about moving cars by rail in India. I remember we had a presentation from the Ministry of Rail at that first conference telling us they weren't interested in automotive. We had some think tanks at the time talking about how we can encourage more cars, finished vehicles to be moved by rail. That was quite a few years ago and it will never happen. I can't see that actually happening anytime soon. But so this session we're going to be looking at, and then after that is the big debate where we challenge some of the car makers and VIPs on some topics. That will be led by Prem Verma, who's our tough questioner in the final session. So don't leave early, but definitely take part in the think tanks. In the program, you'll see a list of the think tanks just after the program page. So have a look at which one's going to be of particular interest to you. Please join them. They're a great way to have extra interaction. With all due respect to all of our panelists over the 2 days, you sometimes can dig a little bit deeper in these think tanks, in the round tables, and exchange honest views without them necessarily being aired in front of the whole audience. So I definitely recommend the think tanks, and they're often said to be the highlight of the conference. So please make sure you join those and hang around for the final big debate at the end of the day. So this session, finished vehicle logistics and creating competitive networks. Once again, we've been very fortunate and kind of timely on this session. We're going to be looking at, as I said, finished vehicle logistics by rail, looking at some new legislation, both North American, global, and Indian through Bill Pollock and Vipul Nanda, and then looking at the driver situation and perhaps, ideas on how we can improve the driver situation. So there's some of the topics that we're going to be covering in this session. So first up, to talk about whether we'll ever be able to really ship cars by rail, I'd like to welcome to the podium Bill Villalon, a Senior VP and Global Leader of Automotive and Head of North America for APL Logistics. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Louis. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that the microphone were on, and thank you, Louis, for the introduction. Indeed, we are moving finished vehicles via rail. We'll talk about that, but this was a journey. But we're going to talk about what we're doing, what we have done. Talk about some of the trends. You're going to see some common themes, I think, from some of the earlier presenters. And clearly, one of the themes here is multimodalism. Because we obviously can't perform the function of moving vehicles from the assembly plants to the dealers with rail alone. Obviously, truck factors into that piece very heavily. So there's clearly going to be a multimodal theme, and this actually, I think, resonates with some of the presenters yesterday, to talk about how we leverage all of the modal capabilities, in India, and then also kind of touch on the whole issue of modal disruption, because I think in many respects that we're on the cusp of modal disruption. Sorry, got ahead of me here. Okay, so as far as outline, and basically these were the questions that were raised. I'm going to spend one slide talking a little bit about the company. I think we're fairly known. But then talk about optimal solutions for networks, the role of technology, what are the challenges that, that we've dealt with, and, and those which still remain. The role of policy reforms, the evolution of networks, and we'll give you one view, obviously our view of the evolution of networks. What are the requirements of networks, and then finally just some concluding thoughts, and I'm going to draw some analogies to some things that we've seen that I think are similar in other parts of the world. Just quickly on AP Logistics, VASCOR, we were formulated about 3 years ago, in India, totally focused on the automotive sector, and from the outset, we seized on putting together a network to move finished vehicles. That was the target, of the joint venture. We're based here in the Delhi area. We are one of 2 licensees. We're the only international licensee, obviously the other one being Maruti for the AFTO policy. Right now, we are operating 4 rakes, primarily today in the Delhi-Chennai corridor, and then the Chennai-Guwahati corridor at present. We've got 2 more rakes on order, and then we're considering other options beyond that. So what are the optimal solutions, in the characteristics of creating an open and connected network? First of all, I think one of the requirements is that we leverage the natural strengths of each of the modes. This is not about one mode or the other. It's where does each of these modes optimally fit. Rail is good for bulk transportation. And movement of automobiles is a bulk movement, in essence. So each train, we're loading 300 or more cars over long distances. And that's really where the rail mode highlights itself. There's been discussion around short C. I think that's reasonable as part of the overall modal mix, given the aspirations of India and the needs to accommodate an automotive sector that arguably is going to grow 2, 3, as much as 5x. Road, clearly direct moves of relatively shorter distances, and then obviously the gathering and distribution activity, the first mile, last mile activities, which obviously go to both short C as well as rail at the same time. I think one of the other values of having multiple modal options is to address supply chain disruptions. I think the OEMs or any shipper, depending upon the vertical you want to talk about, would like to see other options in the marketplace. The richer array of modal options that are present give you more flexibility to build into your supply chain. They have different speeds, different costs, different characteristics. Having a richer mix, I think, it gives the OEM more opportunities to maintain flexibility in their supply chain. Then the other issue is environmental and quality of life issue. And I think this is the other thing that obviously is coming more and more to the fore, the whole issue of green logistics. Certainly, we're obviously aware of there's obviously modal differences. in environmental impacts, pollution is one, and then congestion, is the other. And certainly if we're going to double or triple the industry, and then given clearly some of the congestion issues we're already seeing, it's difficult to conceive of being reliant on one mode in a double or tripling of truck traffic, which is the implication. So what are the optimal solutions? What are some of the characteristics and what are some of the benefits? One is obviously reducing the import crude bill that India faces. Being very, so dependent on on imports there. Of course, OPEC seems to be doing a very good job of bringing that down without anybody's intervention. But clearly, long term, I don't think anybody in this room knows how long energy prices are going to stay at this at this level. And then the other thing is obviously to try to optimize the investment that gets channeled into highway infrastructures at the same time. I think the key theme here is that the finished vehicle movement is appropriately assigned to the optimal mode, and not just by default. There's multiple modes. Obviously, there's different characteristics to each of those modes, and it would seem each mode has a place in the overall network. Technology. We talked about we talked about technology in the last presentation. In a more macro viewpoint. In a micro viewpoint, as far as looking at our product, both operationally and commercially, we rely on technology. In some ways, probably in ways you wouldn't even think about. Certainly, one of the things that we constantly have to deal with, because we do have vertical height limitations. Now, our rail cars have adjustable decks, in them. But one of the things that we do is when we have a mix, because we typically on any given train we have a mix of OEMs and a mix of platforms and products, and we have to figure out what is that optimal mix for the 300 cars. How do we match them based on dimensions? So we've developed technology that allows us to do that load planning and that stowage, if you will. Commercially, one of the things that we have done, and we've adapted it to the local environment here, is we brought finished vehicle technology from North America, here to complement the product. So, for instance, the in-transit tracking, being able to update vehicle information to the dealers, so we can feed that to the dealers. At the same time, and give them in-transit visibility, and then also advice if there's delays in the supply chain. So it's not just about anymore. It's not just about the hardware. It's obviously also about the software at the same time. And then in addition, we do track damage, and we do scanning and inspections at each handoff in the supply chain, which allows you to analyze that data and and obviously improve the quality of the product going forward. So challenges to building a fully integrated network. Uncertainty in investment climate, and this probably doesn't come as a surprise to it's a surprise to anyone. Now, when we first looked at this market, and this going back, several years, the first thing that jumped out on us was the low penetration. It was 2-3% were via rail, a rail movement for finished vehicle distribution in India. Benchmarking that in the U.S., where you have similarly long distances, it's 70%, 70% rail. So I still to this day don't know what the right number is. I know the wrong number is 2 or 3%. That number doesn't make any sense. So I know what the wrong number is. I just don't know what the right number is yet. But obviously, when we entered into this investment, we assumed that over time certain things would happen. Obviously, GST. Of course, we're all still in waiting for that. And I really feel now I'm really kind of into the local culture here, because I thought every year I was told it would be GST next year, and I have to say that over time I developed some skepticism as to when GST will happen. But and then also vehicle length standards. That was one of the other things that we were looking at, and we anticipated some of those. So some of those things clearly we always seem to be kind of on the cusp, and it hasn't quite happened yet. But I do think there's some momentum there. So I would have to say that up to this point in time, our investment thus far has been more rooted in what we feel to be long-term belief than near-term ROI. I think that, and there's further investment that's going to be required in terms of IT, terminals, and modern rolling stock. But I think that the key thing is for the government is to provide some regulatory certainty, and that will help track investment, because the last thing investors like is uncertainty. I think the other lesson here is that I think we still tend to view things very much on a segment-only basis. We really don't have a true multimodal concept. I think that this was something that was pointed out in some of the discussion yesterday, and we need to adopt that type of perspective, so that we try to optimize the whole as opposed to sub-optimizing and focus on any given mode. And I think it challenges, each of the modes to think about what their long-term role is in the development of this, of this industry. So policy reform, how will that help, build the future supply chain? Well, I touched on, on GST and vehicle lengths, and I do believe, in conversations that I've had at this, at this conference and other inputs, that we are close on, on both of these issues. Perhaps closer on the vehicle length standards, but we seem to be moving in that direction. We have engaged railways to talk about the AFTO policy and the way pricing is, is structured. We've argued with them that if they're going to be more competitive, they need to level the playing field. And one of the key elements is energy costs. So now, from a rail, perspective, there's nothing, akin to a fuel adjustment, in our rates that we get from railways, which is typical, in the context that I'm used to in North America. Typically, the railroad will give me a line haul rate, and then it'll have a special fuel factor, and that'll go up or down depending upon fuel, which is obviously a volatile element. So we've asked IR to consider something on that along those lines. And I think overall is just this notion of establishing a level playing field across the across the modes. And I think that with a level playing field across the modes, each mode will naturally adapt and and prosper within its own area where it is most efficient. I think government incentives for for green modes make sense. Because I think that even though these are, economists call these things externalities, they don't get factored into costs. But I think as we're all seeing, they have real economic consequences. And then I touched on IR and their profit structures. But and then how will networks evolve to meet new regulations? I think maybe the real question here is how will the incumbent network adapt to an environment where there's new modal competition and new regulations. So we're living in something of a disruptive environment. And I think it calls on everybody to think about what is their long-term, role. I think in a level playing field, rail will prosper where it does the best job, which is clearly on the longer haul lanes. Frankly, that's one of the reasons that we selected the Delhi-Chennai corridor. That's probably the longest and densest automotive corridor. So we went after the longest length of haul, which is what I think makes the most sense. I think that the AFTO policy, I mean, it is groundbreaking in many ways. I've not found, frankly, an analogous type of program, in other emerging markets. China doesn't do this. They don't open up their network to private investment. So I think that we should give credit to that type of innovation that has come. But I think that it obviously requires, we believe, some more tweaking. And I think that the rail mode will grow. I think the growth is going to be limited, though, by the obviously the policies of AFTO to some degree. Okay, export networks. Couple of thoughts here. I think that for high volume shipments to meet ro-ro vessels, I think that the maximum efficiency is rail movement where the distance is warranted. It's a much more efficient process, facility if you can switch the cars into the port terminal, and it facilitates transfer. So I think that's a very efficient mode. I think the other consideration in the network is, and here's where kind of the ocean piece, the ocean rail piece, and many OEMs are doing this from inland locations, and that's cars and containers. So source loading of containers for export, movements. So concluding thoughts here, I think that there's a great opportunity for railways, and providers to take market share. But I also think that we need to keep in perspective as well that this is not a shrinking pie. This is an expanding pie. So there's going to be additional opportunities for all participants. And I think the key is for participants to think about where do they fit into this scheme and what type of collaborations are possible. Where does rail come into this equation? Because I think rail is here to stay, and it will grow. I think it's just a question of how fast it grows. And then there's also the green logistics dimension of that, which I think will foster it because all other things being equal, rail is a greener mode, as is short sea. The other one, the last point I want to make is that final bullet on modal disruption. I've seen modal disruption before, and I think there's some interesting lessons. I think most of you are aware that in India we're running double stack trains ourselves and other operators because we also operate container trains as well. We use double stack in certain corridors where the vertical clearances allow. What you may not be aware of is where that came from. It came from from North America, and APL was very much involved in that, and that was 30 years ago. But the interesting thing at that point in time, all containers in the U.S. were single stack. Now the railroads played around with car designs to try to accommodate double stack, because in most of the lanes in the U.S. because they're not electrified, you didn't have the vertical clearance issues. So people experimented with those, and unfortunately a lot of the rail equipment that was designed, the first ones that designed for double stack the cars were just very, very heavy because they constructed these huge bulkheads at each end of the rail car to hold the containers in place. Now, the the innovation came from the ocean carriers, APL in particular, because they observed that on the decks of ships, you stack up 6, 8 high, and you use twist locks, at the corners to secure the boxes. So the question that was asked was, can this same type of idea be translated, to rail? And would that then allow a different rail car design? So that's exactly what we did at the time. So it was a skeletal design with skeletal design well car. The bulkheads went away. Tremendous weight was taken out, and the ocean carriers for a period of time basically took over the rail industry in the U.S. I mean, for the containerized movement of product, the container trailer market, they took it over. Now, the next step in this, because the truckers at that point in time said, found it difficult to compete with the cost profile of double stack, and all of their trailers and the truckers, nobody weren't using containers on chassis. They were using fully wheeled trailers with fixed frames. So some of the more forward-thinking truckers went out. They bought containers and said, "Hey, we're going to do this too." So some of the large truckers came in, and then it was a battle between the truckers and the ocean carriers, and the railroads were kind of in the background here, which was interesting. Now today, the railroads have fully adopted this, and that is the de facto mode of transportation in the U.S. But the interesting part was that the innovation came with disruption on the one hand, but modal competition and modal intersection. So I think that I have no doubt that greater modal competition, cooperation will create an environment going forward where we'll come up with some solutions that maybe we didn't fully anticipate, that they're hybrid type solutions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bill. An interesting presentation, following on a little bit from the session yesterday on multimodal, about how competition or perhaps more collaboration will disrupt the industry and help us to become more multimodal, and of course a particular focus on this instance on the rail side of things. Next up, a presentation. I don't know if you've ever thought of this, Bill Pollock from CTM. You've ever thought about where there might be waste in finished vehicle logistics? I don't know. But I'd like to welcome to the podium Bill Pollock, the CEO of CTM.
Thanks, Louis. Excuse me. Good morning. Namaste. My name is Bill Pollock, for those of you who don't know me. I recognize a lot of faces here, but for the benefit of those others, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our vision. I'm from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I was in the auto logistics industry, owning my own auto transport company, and what brought me here to India this very moment was the common thread, of course, automotive logistics, and I think it's a great opportunity for us to get to know each other and perhaps work together to create some common new solutions. Developing a more sustainable model. That's the topic. One of the guiding lights for humanity has always been the quest for improvement. In spite of the world's current turmoil, we constantly push for advancement, and that's a great thing for us, because if we don't, how are we going to accommodate the population coming into this world? It's impossible, so we have to continuously innovate, change. I'm sure most of you have heard of Sir Thomas More and of utopia, and he always talked about this perfect world that could possibly exist. Unfortunately, King Henry VIII didn't agree with him at the end and beheaded him, but he did have an idea that maybe we could make our society better, functional, more harmonious. And I'm sure you guys have all heard of Atlantis as well. Plato talked about it 300 BC, 9,000 years prior, some sort of secret society, this perfect world. And I think in a sense we're all looking for that perfect world here, if we could truly find it. The utopia of logistics, is it possible? We're all here today because we actually believe that. We believe we could make it better. Can it be perfect? I don't know. But we continuously try. So between road, rail, ocean, and air, sometimes air, we got to create this interconnectivity, intermodally. We have to do it in environmentally responsible fashion. We can't just do what works, what's profitable. There's more at stake here, our entire environment. And it's no longer the environment in India or Canada or Russia. That air blows around all around the world. We are all affected by it. We must all work together to create environmental responsibility as a standard. The guiding light, we'll use this slide as the beacon perhaps. Where are we all going to gravitate towards? How are we going to solve this problem of the dysfunction, I call it, in the industry that we all seem to accept every day? Congestion in India, I think you guys are quite familiar with this. It's probably not even a bad day here, but to me it looks like a nightmare. Safety. The first consideration has to be safety. Here's some crazy statistics that I just learned that I just cannot believe. A road accident, death every 4 minutes here in India. 377 deaths every day, like a jumbo jetliner. Every day. This is the craziest one. 1% of the world's vehicles here in India, but account for 10% of the world's road accidents. That's disproportionate, and something must be done. India tops the charts of number of road fatalities, followed by China, Brazil, and then the US. So none of us are innocent, of course, but there seems to be an imbalance here, a disproportionate imbalance. The other fact is that the automotive industry accounts for 40% of the Indian logistics market, but 85% is based on road transportation. That's a big number. And as Bill mentioned, in the US, it's exactly opposite, 72% by rail, and 28% perhaps by road. So it's opposite. Maybe we can do something about that. I'll talk a little bit about legislation. I don't know specifically the status of the legislation here in India, but I've heard some rumors, and perhaps Vipul can elaborate on that shortly. We in the US, as of last Friday, President Obama signed the transportation bill that now authorizes and allows the usage of convertible auto carriers in North America. This is a tremendous piece of news for us because we can now proceed with this type of activity legally with full support of the industry and the government. And that was what we called accidental legislation. It was developed in the early 80s, and it was based on information that a committee had put together at that time, suitable perhaps for that time, but completely outdated. So we're very excited. And those of you who don't think that legislation can change, guess what? I know it can change. We witnessed it. Took 5 years, though, so it was a long road. In China, there's legislation that's been announced. Some of you may be aware of it. August the 7th this last year was announced to the public, and there's a debate process that took place, but the government did say, yes, it will be implemented as presented, July the 1st, apparently, is when they're starting to implement their new legislation. They're going to take off the road all the illegal carriers, all the oversized carriers, the crazy double length, double wide trailers, 30 vehicles, up to 30 vehicles on a trailer in China on a single axle tractor, just a completely unsafe practice, but accepted because it was not regulated. So I really sincerely hope that India can get their legislation realized here, create a standard that everybody can follow, and then build on that standard henceforth. This slide here looks much like the earlier one, but it's in reference to your GST and infrastructure. A little history in Canada. We introduced the GST tax in 1991. Prime Minister Mulroney put it in place because Canada was disadvantaged by a manufacturing tax that was in place at that time. And it made us non-competitive, we'll say, in international markets. So he changed the structure. It originally started at 7%, and it was piggybacked with some provincial sales taxes as well that were identified regional requirements. But it started out at 7% and has now been reduced to 5%, and it's been to the benefit of Canada in general. So I would be optimistic about the effects of GST. It will help infrastructure development here in India, of course, much needed development of infrastructure. Went to the Taj Mahal. It's 200 kilometers from here, but it takes 3.5 to 4 hours, and shouldn't take that long. It should take 2 hours. So once again, hopefully there's some infrastructure improvements. So did you know, and this is a US stat, by the way, 42% of road auto carrier transport is empty. You go out full from your terminal or your base or your hub, yard, what have you, and you go deliver your vehicles to the dealership or whatever destination. You come back empty. You go out full, you come back empty. You go out full, you come back empty, and so on and so on. And we just don't agree with that. And none of the rest of the transportation sector believes in that either, because their empty factor is much lower. They've standardized things. They've changed things so that you can move products, perhaps electronics with pharmaceuticals and what have you, any combination. Why can't we treat vehicles the same way? And Bill mentioned earlier that they put in a rail line or brought in auto carriers to run vehicles from the south to the north and back again, but they've got a balanced flow there. They've got vehicles at each end. But when you don't have vehicles, what are you going to do? Are we just going to accept this situation? I call it a bad habit. The industry, I think, and we brought this habit here to India, actually. I think it all started back in Detroit, back in the Henry Ford days. The raw goods were brought to the plant, and all the fenders and engines and rear ends and panels, car seats, everything was made on site. So their logistics requirements back at that time were not the same as today. Today, all your parts come in from all over the world. So the fundamental process has completely changed. And we just haven't changed with it. And it's time. So it's a bad habit. And I love habits too. I'm just as guilty as anybody else. I put my wallet in my left back pocket, my passport in my top left pocket. I know where it is all the time. It's great having habits. But this is really a bad habit. We accept this empty mile factor. In India, it's upwards of 50%. In China, it's upwards of 50%. South America, same thing. And we say, yay, that's okay. It's not okay. And I'm going to refer to Chris's earlier statement, if you'll allow me, the Jugaad thing. This is the biggest Jugaad I've seen. And it's my personal mission, my personal goal to change this in the industry. If it's something that I can hang my hat on, then I can say I did something in this life. It's important, it really is. 8 billion liters of diesel wasted every year in the auto logistics sector. $75 billion a year on inefficient transportation. This is what our study reveals. And this is not only new vehicles, but also secondary, tertiary market stuff. But nonetheless, it's the auto business. That's a lot of waste. So much waste. And I can say that that amount of money annually could replace all of the road auto carriers in the world 3 times from 1 year's worth of waste. Why aren't we trying to capture that? The ROI is there. We just got to get our heads together. 20 billion kilograms of needless CO2. I offer you this little analogy. The zipper. Look at this thing. What does it do for us? Before the zipper was invented, we had buttons. And they worked, but they're kind of cumbersome. But a zipper works very well, very refined piece of technology. It looks simple. We use it every day. One side needs the other side. They're nothing without each other. Together, they become whole. I'm so confident I can undo my zipper here in front of all you folk, and I can pull it right back up, and I know it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Refined technology, that's from many, many people working together, making this work. Why can't our auto logistics work the same way? What if we had equipment that had the capability of converting itself to suit any mode of shipping? This is not a sales pitch for convertible trailer products. I want to make sure everybody understands this. We are the only ones today in the world, though, that are working on this type of solution. I find that silly. Should be more people working on it, collaborating. What if your equipment could convert and haul some other product? It's doable. We've done it. I did it in my own fleet in Canada, reduced my empty mile factor from around 40% down to less than 5%. Made some money, put it all back into the concept because I believe in it that much. If I did it, why the heck can't all of you do it? What if we had software that could manage the equipment in a multimodal network, providing inbound and outbound coordination, the two sides to the zipper, perhaps? Outbound imbalances, we've identified these. We've actually taken all of the European historical transport data for outbound automotive flows in Europe. And we've identified subzones, 306 subzones in 28 countries, and we know where the vehicles originated and where they ended up. We have that information. And we've identified all those imbalances. So it's no secret, and I know many of you already know that already in the room, but what if we did it on an industry-wide scale? And not just with automotive outbound, but what about with automotive inbound? We're doing the exact same thing now in reverse with all the inbound products. And we will shortly have an idea where the crossovers are, looking for those opportunities, just as rail has done here in India. Same thing. A vehicle, whether it's road, rail, ocean, or air, does not care what it's shipping. So let's identify those synergies and build on them. Create a balance. If we had balance, we wouldn't need to discuss this, but we have tremendous imbalances. The majority of the time, there's an imbalance because we don't play with the rest of the general freight industry. And do we really need to ship automotive parts back Our truck doesn't care. Once again, it could ship anything back. Go to the general freight industry and pick up a load coming back. Inbound, outbound, anybound, that's what we believe should be the case. Convert it, contain it, control it. That's our company slogan. I'd like to mention as well, before I conclude the session, that Lohr Industries from France, they have an organization here in Pune. You guys are probably, most of you are familiar with them, and we have partnered in this initiative worldwide. The Lohr Industries believes in the concept, as do we, and they're the experts in the world that are going to help us move this idea along, develop it, figure out the possibilities. And I invite each and every one of you, bar none, to talk to us. You have ideas, thoughts, because we don't know the Indian market. You know it. You guys are the experts here. We're just introducing a concept, an idea. It's really not that complex of an idea. It's complex due to the complexity of the industry as it stands today and the present processes that have been developed over the last several decades. But we all got to get together and start working on the new, on the future solution. Because there's no way we can keep accepting 40 to 50% empty miles as a standard and live with ourselves. It's ridiculous. I think most of you recognize this individual here. You must be the change that you seek in this world. You guys already know everything that you need to know. That's what I believe. Now it's time for us to just roll up our sleeves together and work this out. I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bill, for that presentation. When I first started looking at whether we should do an automotive logistics magazine, I did some research on whether it should be logistics. It could have been any other automotive topic. But when I was doing my research, one of a very senior person in the automotive industry at that time, in fact, he was the head of global purchasing for the Volkswagen Group, suggested logistics on the basis that although he was at Volkswagen, he was a Spanish national, and he said, wouldn't it be great if we could ship cars from Germany to Spain and oranges back from Spain to Germany? That was about 18 years ago, and we're still not really near that. So, Bill's discussion today was very much something that almost the automotive logistics group was built on. Originally. Next, we've talked about kind of technology and new ideas and containers and rail and multimodal and everything. And whilst we're trying to reduce the 85% of transportation that's done by truck will always be very important, not least because of the first and last mile. It will always be important, and if truck's going to be important, then one of the most important factors in that is the drivers. So, it's be interesting to see how the trucking industry is developing and to understand one of the most important areas when it comes to road transport. So I'd like to welcome to the podium Selvan Desaraj, the founder of Transport Mitra Services.
Very good afternoon. I really want to wake you up. In the last 2 days, I think we've seen a lot of opportunities. We've seen a lot of developments happening in the country to move forward. Now, I want all of you all to think with me. Let's get back 30 years back to 1985. How were the roads in India. It was a single road. And where are we today? This is where we are. There's a lot of focus from the government to build the infrastructure to cater to the economic growth. How was a truck in 1985? It was a very small, right? What has technology done to the trucks? You know how the trucks are today? And Bill was telling us the way forward. Now the roads and the truck were built for the driver to drive the trucks. Now let's get back again to 1985. How was the driver? And I want all of you all to pause here and think. Has the driver changed in the last 30 years? I'm sorry to say, no, they have not changed. They have remained the same. Now, if we don't lift this community up, are we going to sustain our business? Is the question. Are you all in agreement with me? Are the truck drivers 30 years behind? Now let's look at some data points. India is the second largest as far as the road is concerned. 85% of the logistics still happen by road. Three PL players and a few MNCs are still getting it organized and running the business. The biggest problem today for the country, today at 2015, we are at a shortage of 25%. That means 25% of the trucks are standing idle. How do we move forward? I agree that there's a lot of talk about multimodal transportation, but I think we know that it's going to take another 5 to 10 years for the multimodal transportation to really take off in India the way we envisage. India currently needs 750,000 drivers every year. When the Planning Commission in 2012 sat down and prepared the planning document, they envisaged with the economic growth that India will need double the truck drivers in 2022. And after 3 years, we are running at a shortage of 25%. Now, I want you all to understand this data point. Now, I'm comparing India to US and China. I don't know, in India, everybody looks at cutting cost, and the first thing the axe falls on is on transportation. If there is a recession, we need to cut cost. Where do you cut cost? Transportation. How far are we going to go on this? Now, if you all see the total logistics cost when it is split, almost 50% of the cost is transportation. China and US are almost there. But where is India? I want each one of you all to understand that the transportation cost in the world, India is the cheapest, and we cannot still cut the cost. Why I'm stressing on this point is, every time we reduce cost, we tell the transporters to give better prices. And the transporter still needs to make his money, so he is pushing the buck to the driver. Now, why are we getting into a shortage of driver? People feel drivers earn a lot of money. If that is the case, we wouldn't have the shortage. So the whole problem is drivers are not paid enough, and if we continue to go this way, we will not have drivers. We will have companies, OEMs manufacturing trucks, but we will not have drivers to drive them. I think if we do not correct this, the shortage by 2022 would get to a 60%. Now also understand, as a country, the average kilometers driven by a driver is roughly around 250 to 260 kilometers, when the global averages are 600 to 700. Now, please understand, if we can increase a 30, 40 kilometers average per day, the whole economy of the country would change. And this is what the drivers can do. There seems to be some technology problem. So what is Transport Mitra all about? I said we need to look at transforming the transportation industry. I've been working for the last 30 years in the transportation business. All my 30 years, I've been hearing people telling that in India, transportation sector is very unorganized. That is when I thought, can I put my thoughts and look at how we can get the transportation industry organized. So when I looked at a lot of challenges, I saw the biggest challenge for the country is the truck drivers. So that is where we made our vision and said, let's study this and let's look at how we could help the country to develop this truck driver community. First, social awareness. I'm sure all of you all are aware. In India, they are not literate, the drivers are not literate. They are not on regular salaries. You look at health and wellness, there's nothing for the drivers. He's a guy driving in the heat, in the rains, in the waters. He's prone to so many problems. Economic enhancement, that's another challenge which we want to address. So our solution, when we went and met a lot of corporates, be it a Nestle, Indian Oil, or a DHL or a FedEx, everybody says, Selvin, we know there is a problem and what we need is drivers. So I said, where do we get drivers from? Fortunately, I met Ramesh, who's dedicated his last 4-5 years on the uplifting the truck driver community. Then we both started traveling together on the highways, talking to the drivers and understanding what is the problem. An engineer's son wants to become an engineer. A doctor's son wants to become a doctor. A driver's son, no way, will become a driver. And why should we all think that he should become a driver? Now leave the driver. We're talking to a lot of transport fleet owners. He said, what are your sons going to do? Are they going to take over your business? No, they are not going to be in the trucking business. So they understand how challenging it is. So the question is, from where do we get drivers then? Yesterday, there were discussions about how the Olas and the Ubers have transformed the passenger business, taxi business. Now, can that happen for cargo? Yes, it can. But again, the question is, who's going to drive those trucks? Now, the younger generation who are still willing to take up driving as a profession are happy to join an Uber or a Ola. So we are not going to get younger generation to the truck industry. So where is the drivers going to come from? Some of the data points say that there are 30% of the truck drivers in the country who are unmarried. Why? Because there's a social stigma that he is a truck driver. He is looked down. On health, the other issue is when you look at the HIV/AIDS in the country, 50% of the HIV/AIDS are contributed by the truckers. With the nature of their job, you will understand they are just not contributors, but they are also carriers. Like you and me, they also have a lot of health issues. They have fatigue. They have stress. I remember talking to a driver early in the morning when he was about to start his journey and he was brushing. And he said, our blood pressure starts going high now. I said, why? He says, I start thinking which cop is going to catch me, which commercial tax officer is going to catch me, and where do I get money to pay them? The kind of harassment they have on the road. So I think they suffer more from illness. So we plan to do a regular health check for them. We've partnered with a company called Pixel Healthcare from Canada. We would like to regularly do health checks for these drivers. The third problem with the drivers is I think somebody shared in the morning that the number of accidents, I think Bill, you did that. Number of accidents, I think for the last 4 to 5 years, it's like 135,000 fatalities in India. It's almost like 365, what you mentioned. Now, 50% of these accidents happen in the midnight, between 1 to morning 5. Now, there are various other reasons as to why the drivers want to drive during that time. One, maybe you have city entry limits, so they don't want to get in there. The biggest thing is the drivers call the government officials as vultures. They say the vultures are waiting for us to pray. Now, it could be a cop, it could be an RTO, it could be a tax official. So that is the reason they want to drive in the late night hours. And that is the reason there are more number of accidents during that time. So the simple solution is, if all the corporates come together, all the transporters come together and make it a rule that the truck driver are human beings like you and me, they should not be driving between 1 and 5. I think we will save so many lives in this country. Transport Mitra wants partnership with all the corporates and all the transporters in the country. Now, when we decided we are not going to get new drivers because of various reasons, the only way we can increase the number of drivers in this country is to motivate the current drivers and keep them happy. Now, we decided on 3 things. First thing is to upskill them. I'm sure most of you all will agree how a driver profession in this country starts off. He is in a village doing nothing, and then one of his relative or a friend calls him and says, come on board, I will take you for a Bharat Darshan. And then he's like an assistant driver, and he goes around the country. And after 5-6 months, he says, I also need to start driving. So he gets to an agent, makes his license, and then he's on his own. So the drivers in this country don't go to any skill development before they start their profession. So we want to basically upskill them They are good drivers, but the saddest part is they don't know highway signages too. So there are soft skills which we plan to teach them. The second thing, as I said, is health, and the third thing is road safety awareness. So how do we do these trainings to the drivers? Like, we cannot get them to a classroom and do the training. So the only place we could do is at the factory gates. Now, will they be available all through there? No. Then we looked at the old saying, the mountain will never come to the mammoth. The mammoth has to go to the mountain. Then we said, put our minds together and said, where do these truckers stop? They stop at the dabas. For those of you who don't understand dabas, these are highway motels or hotels, which has no basic amenities. So we are taking Swachh Bharat into account, and we are looking at corporates adopting dabas in the Golden Quadrilateral, where we are looking at adopting at least 100 to 150 dabas so that the truckers could stop there. We could do the training, we can do the health and wellness program, also provide restroom facilities for them. Now, why daba adoption? Look at the number of accidents. This is 2014. Now, our Motor Vehicle Act very clearly says that we will need a restroom or an amenity at every 100 kilometers. But it's all on paper. There's nothing actually. So where do these truck drivers sleep? When we asked a lot of truck drivers, where do you all sleep? They only sleep at 3 places, either on the steering, or they sleep on top of the truck, or underneath the truck. Because today he's worried that something will get stolen from his truck. So truck drivers are not just drivers, I think they are multitaskers. They are a security guy, they manage cops, right? They also manage the fuel. So they are multitaskers, but they also drive. What should we do? Should adopt dabas on the Golden Quadrilateral. Benefits is, I think we can reduce accidents. If you look at even the finished goods, automotive trailers, which are huge, now where do they stop? They stop on the highways, and that causes accidents. So what we are looking at daba adoption is to create parking place for the trucks so that they can park there properly. So this is exactly what we want to do at the dabas. We want to do the training, we want to do the healthcare program. Now basically we want the health to be assessed and place them in 3 buckets, like a red, amber, and a green. Now we're looking at how we can get a red guy to an amber and an amber guy to green. To start this program, we adopted a daba ourselves at Sonipat in the month of September, and we are almost training 30 drivers every day. We also have started a government initiative with the Karnataka government in Bangalore. We are running a driver empowerment center. Now this is the truck terminal at Bangalore, which is 54 acres. And you will be surprised that there was not a single toilet built for the drivers. Now this is the way we've been treating drivers in this country. Now how do we get drivers? I think it's time each one of us in this room takes this responsibility to see how we could respect drivers and add value so that we get more drivers to run this economy. So Transport Mitra has designed various tailor-made programs. We have a smart driver training, It's all about being smart. We all had mobiles a few years back, but mobiles have become smarter. So I think it's time the drivers become smart too. We plan to do road safety awareness, a driver wellness program. We also want to do CSR consulting. All of you all know that last year there was a CSR bill introduced and 2% to be spent on CSR. And why not look at spending that CSR amount on the drivers who can sustain the business for us? We get into a lot of village adoptions. Why not look at the driver community? If you all can develop this, I think we will have more drivers tomorrow. Transport Mitra also looks at facility management, the award auction program. Before I end my presentation, I would like you all to question as to whose responsibility is it to uplift the truck driver community. Is it the corporates? Is it the transporters? Is it the government? Who? Can we have an answer, please? Every one of us, I suppose, every one of us. I compare these drivers to a soldier on the border. A soldier, he's got a social status, he's got good salaries, he's respected. But I think our drivers also do this much more work than a soldier. They're soldiers on the highways. Now, all of us need to understand, if there are no drivers, we are not going to be into the business. The economy of the country runs because of the drivers. I request each one of you all in this room to take this to the others who are not here. I think it is important for each one of us. Everybody, I think, knows that we are getting into driver shortage, but somebody has to take a step forward and look at how we can get these drivers. Do you all agree that drivers are the backbone? Do you all agree that we have not given what we have to give to the drivers? If so, I request all of you all to stand up and let's give a standing ovation to all the truck drivers who've been driving, untiring the whole 30 years. Can you all stand up, please? To the truck drivers. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sylvain. Obviously, a passionate plea there about the plight of the truck drivers. I think we all agree that the truck drivers are important. The solution, as we said, isn't simple, and it is a global problem. Even in North America, I don't think truck driver salaries are necessarily an issue. Obviously, the more you pay people, the more people want the job. I think in India it is a little bit simpler than it is in North America, but in many of our conferences around the world, driver shortage is a big issue, but perhaps particularly in India. And perhaps to catch up a little bit more on what's happening on the trucking side, from regulation, perhaps drivers, and so on. I'd like to welcome to the podium Vipul Nanda, who we perhaps known in the past from Mercurio Paglia, but today representing the Car Carriers Association. Thank you, Vipul.
Good afternoon, everybody. Since we are discussing finished vehicle logistics, I would just like to give you a background of what has been happening in this finished vehicle logistics, or probably the car carrier industry, in the last 1 year. We were having this conference last year in the same place and around probably the same dates, when the Haryana government decided to stop giving fitness certificates to all automobile carrying carriers all of a sudden. Incidentally, 80% of the car carriers or the automobile carriers are registered in Haryana. So it became a problem for everybody. Of course, there was a settlement which has to be done between the government and the truck owners. So ultimately, fitness started being given to all the carriers, but we had to give an affidavit, a surety bond that whenever we come for the fitness after, we'll only be given fitness one time, and we'll have to follow the rule book when we come for the second time with the fitness. So things started, but the solution was not there. In the meantime, our newly formed Car Carrier Association wrote to the central government that we are ready to follow the rules, but the rules have to be defined because there's no definition of a car carrier in the Central Motor Vehicle Act. And of course, government took note of it and very quickly called us for discussions on this. And a committee headed by IIT Professor Anup Chawla, under his chairmanship, was appointed to do the necessary studies regarding the dimensions of the articulated car carrier trailer. An extensive study has been done by Professor Anup Chawla during the last 7 to 8 months. Inputs were taken both from Car Carrier Association as well as CM. And finally, last month, Professor Chawla has given the recommendations to the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways. And in the coming days, hopefully, the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways should gazetize the dimension of the car carriers' trailers. This is now going to be a reality. And probably we'll be having legal carriers in a very few days from now. Car carriers, I think everybody must be aware that they vary in size. There's no standardization. They start from 18 meters, maybe end up at 23.5 meters. So, and today almost 80% of the car carriers are more than 22 meters. We call them TR10s because they carry 10 small cars. But after this gazette, it will have to be converted into 18.75 meters, which is the international norm. And that is called TR8 because then it will be carrying 8 cars. Now, what will be the impact of all this? And are we prepared for it? It will have 2 immediate effects. Reduction of capacity for car carrying by at least 25%. And increase in cost of transportation of cars by at least 25 to 30%. And the biggest scary part is that on top of it, the balance sheets of all car carrier companies have been so negatively affected in the last 3 years because of various factors: fuel prices, toll tax increase, driver shortages, increase in inputs. So the OEMs also must realize that the transporters are your partners and all their capital has been eroded from their balance sheets in the last 3 years. I don't blame anybody except for the circumstances and the prevailing market conditions that we have seen in the last 3 years for this situation. And I would urge all OEMs to focus on the key burning issue of CMVR, otherwise the results are going to be very, very scary. The capacity required to meet this change will not be easy to fill. The people were talking about low capex in the morning, I think so. The logistic industry should be low capex. But I don't think so in car carriers we can have a low capex. It is a very heavy investment is required to make a car carrier, and if you have a fleet of about 100 carriers, the investment is among us. Hence, the risk is also very high. So now coming after these, this legislations come in, it's gazetized, so what is the way forward? I probably feel there's only one way forward. The car carrier transporters, the LSPs, along with the OEMs, should be very transparent in sharing what should be the cost after the new rules are implemented. The OEM should realize that because of reduction in the capacity of the carrier, the extra per car cost has to be borne by them. The OEMs and the LSP must together do a transparent study on the working of a car carrier, and it should be a comprehensive study, and the conclusion should be what is the right costing to run a trailer which is legal as per rules. And once all this is implemented, both the OEMs as well as the LSP and the truck owners should now discipline themselves to follow what rules have been made for them by the government, as we must not forget that we have landed in this situation just because all stakeholders, whether it be the OEMs or the truck owners or the LSPs, have jointly to be blamed for designing the current type of carriers as per their requirement and needs and not as per rules. So we must, after this thing is implemented, and hopefully it should be done very soon, we must, I would request all OEMs to discourage what is not legal. And they should only go for legal trucks, and that is the way forward, I think so. Otherwise, we'll end up in the same situation. In the times of crisis, OEMs will be giving incentives, and then when there's excess transport, we'll be told to give discounts. So this is not the way to work, where the investment is so heavy and the business is risky. So this is not the way to work forward. Apart from this, the other main challenge, as Selvam just told us, is about driver shortages. This is a very big challenge. It's a very big challenge, and I must compliment all the major OEMs who have started working on it, and they have come out with various schemes and scholarships for driver community, their children, to make them a dedicated lot for our transporters. But still, I think so, what situation Selvam told us, it's alarming, and we must all work for this, and we all are stakeholders to it, and if we don't have drivers, I don't think so we'll be able to move, as 85% of the automotive logistics is done through trucks in India, and it will be almost impossible if that shortage level, as Selvam is saying, would reach to the 60% level. All of us as shareholders, everybody's responsibility to see that the drivers are taken care of, and the job is made more respectable. It is not today, I'm sorry to say, but it is our responsibility, all of us jointly, to see that this is done. Thank you. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Vipul, for giving us that update. We did actually, Nimish and I met the Joint Secretary from the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways on Monday, when he promised to be a speaker at the conference. Unfortunately, for various reasons, Parliament being in session and some important meetings that they had with the actual minister, in the end he just couldn't make it. But it's good to see that what was obvious even in the meeting that we had with him is how important he's taking these issues. how important it is in his in the development of his role, because he's relatively new in the role. So although it's unfortunate he couldn't be with us today, thank you, Vipul, for giving us an update on what's happening. Obviously we're running late, but we've got time within the lunch break to catch up. So I'd still want to give you an opportunity if you just wanted to ask one or two questions. There's a question on this side, please.
Hello, I'm Anand Singh from Lore. My question is for Mr. Vipul. Mr. Vipul, the study done by the IIT professor, is it mainly focused on car carriers or vehicle carriers in total, including motorcycles, scooters, farm tractors, construction equipment? And is the recommended legislation updated for all types of vehicles on wheels? Because the ministry will update this probably only once. They will not do it separately for cars, separately for motorcycles, separately for farm tractors, etc., etc.
Right now, this particular study is only for articulated carriers, the car carriers. It's only for that. Of course, the study is going on for other things, but the recommendations so far have only been given for the car carriers.
Because, for example, we have a huge truck carrier industry, farm tractor industry, all articulated vehicles.
So it's for articulated vehicles. It's for only for articulated vehicles right at the moment, because the status of the rigid trucks remains the same as of now, what is in the book right now.
So whether it's construction equipment, trucks?
No. It's only for specifically for car carriers, articulated vehicles.
Wow, okay.
Any other questions? Okay, I know someone has a question, but I can't see because of the lights. So. Okay, well, perhaps everyone's feeling sorry for me because they know how important food is for me. So I'd like to thank the panel for a very interesting discussion, for the passion and the interest and the desire to make change, whether it's for multimodal, whether it's taking waste out of the system, whether it's the trucking or the drivers themselves. I think that was a very interesting session, so thank you very much to the panel. If you can, we'll get back on track after lunch, so we'll convene back in here at 2 o'clock for the Automotive Logistics think tanks. That'll be back in this room. And then after the think tanks, we'll have the big debate led by Prem Verma to talk about the future and to question some of the leaders of our industry. Thank you.